So we're going to talk today about priority. I know you might say, well, who are you, Dave, to tell me what my priorities are? I am no one. But I'm going to give you some life experience that I've gone through. And I'm also going to give this to you in an orderly fashion that a lot of people get confused about. So what happens is you see a lot of people out there trying to do influencer type of things, but they don't really bring the furthest, most ultimate goal in mind. Okay. So there's no question that, and I'll make this very practical. I'm going to bring this right down to the practical sense of your career, but I'm going to talk about a lot of different things in this. And ultimately, this is what will make you the most happy. So at the end of the day, we're here to go to heaven. That is it. Now, we may not be in heaven, and the only way we can go to heaven is through faith in Jesus Christ and fidelity to his word. And if we are not faithful to him, and we act obediently according to that. In other words, we can't just believe. And I know there are some Protestant friends of mine that believe he's just, once saved, always saved, but that's not in the Bible anywhere. In fact, it's quite anti-biblical. But we need to believe and we need to work things out. And we can get into that, by the way. The only place in the Bible where it has the word faith alone are in James, where it says, "You are not saved by faith alone." And the encouragement of works is very important, which is why also St. Paul said that he is working out his salvation in fear and trembling, which he was already a believer. He would not need to do if he just needed to magically go, I believe, and then go, because even the demons believe, right? So we need to work this out. We need to believe, and we need to be faithful to that belief, okay? So how do we do that? Why does it matter? Well, if you think about it, the first commandment that God gave Adam and Eve was to multiply. Okay, to be fruitful and multiply. And it brought great joy. If you look at the entire Old Testament, it's all about that. It's about the blessings of a family, to have sons and daughters, to have a great wife, and the blessings that come from that. It is a very, very, very modern contemporary idea that children are bad. Okay, and it runs against human nature. It is to literally kill off who we are as a species. We're like, the survival of the fittest is a good thing, people say. But yet, some of the fittest people kill themselves off from multiplying. The theory is lame. If it is an actual real thing, which I, by the way, don't believe in it in that regard, but if it were actually a theory that survival of the fittest meant that the wisest and the smartest people were able to pass on their genes, why is it that the most educated people now will not have children? Really? Doesn't that sound like maybe a filter for getting rid of the weakest? It does to me. But again, I'm not a survival of the fittest type of guy anyway in my beliefs. But there's just a contradiction there. So the number one thing that we could possibly do to have happiness, joy, and peace in life is to be united and faithful to God. But that doesn't work. We don't follow his plan. So the second thing for you men is to actually establish a patriarchy. Wow. The word that is hated by the woke, patriarchy, because they think it's misogynistic and everything else. No, it's beautiful. It's an amazing thing. And it holds a place for women at the highest level and the highest regard. So it is not in competition with that. And that's what the left has to do, is they have to try to tell you that these are always in competition with each other. Okay? They're not. The greatness of a woman comes through that patriarchy. But a man needs to earn the title patriarch. And it's not an easy title to earn. You need to be battle proven in so many different ways. I'm 56 years old, by the way. I have 9 kids. I have 10 grandchildren. When my wife and I get together, there are 26 of us altogether, and that number is growing. So I'm kind of entering into my patriarchy, although it takes a while to develop and manifest it. And I couldn't have talked about this, obviously, in my 20s, 30s, or 40s. Even in my 50s, if I didn't have children when I was a little bit younger, I wouldn't have been able to do it because I'm experiencing now. So I want you to know that the way you reach a patriarchy is it's not separate from or independent from the success that you must strive for in the world. When I say success in the world, I don't mean the worldly success that people generally interpret like money, wealth, and power, although I don't mind telling you that in my life, I have earned money, wealth, and power. But I would say, though, it's the following of your vocation. It's to be able to say, you know, I will hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. I was given the gift and the natural ability to teach. Therefore, I educated myself and I learned to be a great teacher. A great teacher may not ever be famous. They're going to be very powerful because they're going to influence others. Now, you might be a politician, you might be an actor, you might be a business owner, you might be a carpenter or a mechanic or a construction worker or a custodian, nurse, medical field, whatever it might be. To be faithful to that is to become your best at it. And so I want to talk about how you become a patriarch, what that journey is like, what it can bring to you, and the happiness it will bring. Now, there are many people that have talked about kind of like 4 levels of manhood in order to reach a patriarch. And I've heard some of these philosophies, but I've experienced my own, and that's what this is coming from. So it's just off the cuff, it's not even with notes. The first thing that happens before a person becomes a patriarch is they're a boy. Of course, they're an infant and then a toddler and then a boy. What does a boy do, and why is this important? Because your boyhood affects your ability to be a patriarch later. A boy is whimsical. He's not really, he doesn't really contemplate things in the world. He just kind of goes after his desires in a whimsical way and needs to become docile to authority. And that's the first part of building a patriarchy, is to be whimsical, just to go to play. Play is amazing. It gives you an imagination. It gives you thoughts and dreams. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a baseball player. Okay. I want to be, a archaeologist, whatever the person is thinking about doing. They have fantasy about it so they can explore possibilities. And these things kind of get deep set into where they set their path. But mostly what happens is they learn to respect authority. That when your father speaks or your mother speaks, you listen to that voice. And when you learn to respect authority, and by the way, some of us are subject to not very good moral authority. We can have really great parents. I happen to be blessed with great parents, but some people are not. We have to learn that other ways. So if you didn't learn how to respect authority, you're going to have a very difficult time actually being in authority, because you might force people to follow your authority in the wrong way. So we have to pay attention to this. So if you didn't actually go through the process, you're going to have to learn in another way. And we're going to get more into this in subsequent videos. But the next thing you go through is the second level. The second level is actually adolescence. Adolescence it's a little bit different. You kind of know you should be following authority and you should be paying attention to it. And that should pretty much have matured in you. I will be docile to authority. But you just don't really think that rationally. That frontal lobe is not entirely joined together. And so as a result of that, you're always pushing the boundaries and you're exploring things. You're jumping off of something just because you can jump off of it. You're taking risks that you wouldn't take given better thought. You might even know that you're supposed to pay attention to rules, but you don't really have the great ability to foresee consequence. Or to know the gravity of breaking the rule. Okay. So you would be at the age of reason. So you know the difference between right and wrong, very true. But the magnitude of the decision that you're making when you do something that is too risky isn't really there. That's what adolescence is generally about. Okay. So one of the major goals that you have as a boy is to become docile to authority. But it's also to have wild imagination and fantasy about the future and about life and about who you are. The second level is to continue docility through authority, but to enter into adolescence, which is where you're going to take wild risks without knowing the consequences of these risks. Even though you have a respect for authority and a certain docility to authority, you might be saying to yourself, well, I know that I'm not supposed to go beyond that sign. I kind of respect authority, but it's not really that important of a rule, and the consequence wouldn't be that bad. So you step across that sign, and now you're in a precarious situation because you could actually think about it. So basically, it allows the docility that you learned as a boy to sink in a little bit, to gel a little bit more, so you know how far to push those boundaries or not. Then you enter into a third level. And a lot of people say that you would just go right from boyhood to adolescence to manhood. And I would say that is true. You go into manhood, but there are stages of your manhood that I think are important to understand. And the first one is the adventurer. Now, I would say it's the adventurer and the father and the husband almost immediately. way too many people talk about having kids later and later and later in life. And what they'll try to argue for you is if you have your kids later in life, you can enjoy life now. Well, I want to tell you there's a couple of very, very bad and dangerous things about that. One, it's kind of like wanting the dessert before you actually earned it. It is to say that you want this life that would be almost akin to retirement, to have a certain amount of wealth and flexibility and freedom before you've actually really earned that. And it puts a compromise in there, and it actually prevents you from maturing. So what happens instead is if you and by the way, the second thing that it does is it says that children are really bad. Like in other words, what is more valuable and more important to do now, because if I don't do it, I will have missed out on life, is to travel and stay in a hostel. Okay, well, really, is that the case? I don't think so. And you develop bad selfish habits, by the way, so you reduce your ability to be qualified effectively as a father when you self-indulge, and certainly as a husband as well, too. So you're just setting yourself up for failure. Not to mention the fact that the adventure that you have by raising a family and having children brings way more joy than you will ever have. And by the way, people who used to run around doing all these things and then later in life do have children always say the greatest blessing they've ever had in their life was children. So why would you wait for it? I mean, really, why, if children and family are the greatest blessing you'll ever have in life, are you so willing to delay and live a certain part of your life without ever having that? See, if you do it right, you can do it where you have your children when you're young, you've got all this energy, and you can provide for them in the ways that you couldn't otherwise when you're a little bit older by way of time and energy. And then they all of a sudden are grown and they become adults and they become responsible. And as you move on in your life, you have now greater freedoms because they are independent. You've done that raising the family, but you have that family there. So you feel great about that. And if you raise them right, they help out with you in ways that you couldn't have as you get a little bit older and you need the help a little bit more. You can have your cake and eat it too your entire life if you do it that way. And this is a super important message to know. Men, you have been given an absolute utter lie that you should wait to have kids or that it's not as important as your career, which is a bunch of bullshit. And I will tell you on so many different levels, it is. One level is you don't have to choose behind a great career or having a family. You know, in building many businesses, and I've built my business, I've sold them for hundreds of millions of dollars, more than one time, by the way. I've had over my lifetime, over 100,000 people report to me. Well, not directly, but in my organizations, I have over 100,000 people, and I built six different companies. And the reason I say that is because I did that having children at a very young age. At 21, I started my family. And it's super important to know that you don't have to choose between the two. When I had young men work for me, and they said, by the way, after being with me for a couple of years and doing okay, moderate performance, they say, I'm getting married. I was always like, yes, their productivity is going to go up. Why? Because now they have to work for something more than just themselves. And then they say, hey, we have a baby on the way. Okay, yes, productivity is going up even more. And in almost every circumstance, it did. When I work with independent single men, some are great. By the way, you cannot put everybody in one basket. That is a ridiculously bad idea. But collectively speaking, if somebody said, would you rather be working with a guy who is married and has children and needs to provide for them, or would you rather work with a completely single, independent guy? I would take the married guy with children any time of the day. And in fact, they are the wealthiest people in America. Married people with children. Why? There's a certain sense of responsibility that is different than otherwise. It's very important to keep that in mind. Okay? So you go from boyhood into adolescence into the adventurer family guy. That's a younger area, though. It's where you don't really know what your career is or how to accomplish your career. It also includes probably some college time if you did decide to go to college. But at those years, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and I'm not saying we need to get married at 18. That's not my point. But the point is you start thinking about this, and you don't just date for dating's sake. You date to find a great wife, okay? And that's a great treasure when you find a great wife, as it is for you, as it is for her to find you. And you're forming yourself toward that sort of thing, okay? And as you do that, you're trying to figure out, what am I going to be? I mean, I thought I was going to be an accountant when I was 18. Boy, was I wrong about that. Okay. I didn't even know what an entrepreneur was when I was 18, but I wanted to go out there and try to conquer the world. And I should say this, to live the adventure. I wanted to conquer it. I didn't know how. So I had to take on this early adventure, and I needed to establish my roots. And I didn't have a reason to actually do something, a reason to build something, a reason to go after something. Okay. And then what happens is you start to figure out what that is. I am a doctor, or I should be a doctor. I'm going to be in medicine. I am an entrepreneur. I am a business leader. I am an author. Whatever it happens to be that you are, I'm an educator. And then what you do is you have to conquer that. You have to conquer it. You literally have to become the best at it. Anybody who wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to be an average custodian today, isn't going to be a great one. I'm going to be an average ophthalmologist today, isn't going to be a great one. I'm going to be an average accountant. I want to be a so-so airline pilot. No. If you're really going to be a man, you need to conquer yourself. You need to conquer your vocation or your profession. You need to be great at it while you continue to become a family man. You be more advanced in what that is while you're conquering your career. And the two are not, they don't have to fight against each other. It's a false choice to believe that you have to conquer yourself and conquer your career and have that run against your family. No, you can work together to make these things harmonious. Now, there's no doubt about it. The soldier has to go to war sometimes, and they will be away from their family. But there are ways that you can make up for it if you are deliberate and conscientious about it. And the example that you provide to your children by being that sacrificial is also a very substantial and a real thing, particularly when you come home and you devote yourself to them, which says that, hey, I had to go. I didn't necessarily want to go. And you're more important than that. Okay, so this is a very key thing to remember. You go, and by the way, the only way that you can conquer your career or your vocation is by conquering yourself. This is where you were docile to authority when you were a boy, or you learned to be. You continued that as an adolescent, even though you pushed the limits, but not understanding the consequences. As an adventurer, you understand the consequences, but you say, I'm willing to take risks and I want to explore more about who I am. I remember that adventurous stage in my life. You know what it taught me? All my vice. It taught me where my parents did a fantastic job ferreting out vice and instilling virtue, but where I was supposed to take over, I fell short. And I saw, man, I was a coward. I saw that my sense of justice was off. I saw that my decision-making was off. Sticking to things, I really didn't do that as effectively as I could. My pride was unbelievable. When you go on your adventure, you start to learn these things about yourself. See, everybody before they're on the adventure thinks they're going to be the best at it. Oh, I'm gonna go conquer. I've got all the strength that it takes. And then you get out there in actual battle of life, and you start to realize that you're not all that. Then you establish, where am I going in this? I am going to conquer this. I'm going to conquer my career. But I've now been able to take inventory of all these vices that I have and these virtues that I lack in order to enhance them and conquer them and go after it. So you go from boyhood to adolescence to the adventurer family man to the conquering family man to now the mentor, because you've conquered something and you were deliberate about it and you've raised this family and they continue to grow. And as they grow, you get a chance to continually develop the advice that you're thinking about and to share and to refine, because, there's a consequence to your advice. You're raising other, future adults into the world, and you have to provide them good, solid, sound advice. More than anything, you start to realize that your job is to assist them to heaven, obviously only through the work that Christ did on the cross, but it is our job to make sure that we have them directed toward God, so that death, burial, and resurrection means something, right? To them, because they're participating and they're not on the sidelines. They're actually living that part of their life. And that you order all of your advice in relationship to that. But this allows you to eventually become a mentor. And a mentor is somebody who actually literally has something to share or add. Now, you can be a mentor basically at any age. I mean, if you were in 6th grade and you're going to mentor a 4th grader or a 5th grader, you can do it. Why? You've gone through that experience and you've had a certain amount of wisdom and knowledge to do it. There's a lot of young mentors online. I think that there are tremendous ones, even in their 20s and their 30s, who give a lot of great advice. And I think that should continue to happen. However, if you're not qualified as a mentor, you shouldn't do it. And most people are not at that age. Very few people are. Even though most people think they are, they're not. And I've worked with a lot of these people. They been in my companies and they see some of the things that I do, and maybe they're eager to do that and they want to skip the step of actually building companies and leading a lot of people and suffering through things. And they want to just kind of take some things that they learned on a bumper sticker or maybe a few different talks, and they want to get that recognition. And so they go out there and they find millions of followers. Why? Because they're charismatic and they can parrot out good advice. But when it comes down to it and they get pressed, or they have to get into the minutia or make decisions this against that advice, they don't give good advice because they haven't lived through the battle. Now, in order to be qualified to give good advice as a mentor, it doesn't mean that you have to have made all sorts of enormously great decisions, although that helps. Some of my mentorship that works effectively based on the mistakes that I made. And when you're around a guy who's gray or bald like I am, a little bit of gray in their beard with grandkids, and by the way, maybe you made mistakes, and so therefore your patriarchy, by way of literally having a lineage, isn't going to be there. You can still be kind of a step patriarch to others. You can provide guidance to others, and that's very necessary. And oftentimes it's a result of having made bad decisions that you don't want others to make. But for most of us, it's going to be a blend of bad decisions. Hey, don't do this, I did. And good decisions. Do this because it worked well for me. And so your patriarchy and your ability to be a mentor should never be some sort of litmus test based on your perfection in life. No, no, no. It's what you've learned about the decisions you made in life. It's whether or not you actually received something from that message that said, that was bad, don't do it again, and warn others of it. This was good, do it again, and tell others of it. It is not self-loathing to say, I made these mistakes, don't do them, nor is it boastful to say from a pride perspective, look at the great decisions I made. See, if you know your great decisions were great decisions, you want to share them with people because you want them to have the bounty or blessings that you had from doing them. Likewise, you want them to avoid the pain of the others. So it's necessary at this point. That's where mentorship comes out. So, you certainly don't want to mentor somebody on what it's like to win a gold medal in the Olympics if you have never won a gold medal in the Olympics, let alone anything. You certainly don't want to mentor people on what it's like to be a, award-winning brain surgeon if you literally don't know the difference between skin and bone. So it's super important that you mentor on what you know and you learn things from your mistakes and through the things you've done right. So then from mentor, you move into patriarch. Now, this, I hope for you, is literal. That you would sit back and you would say, wow, if I had, just as a number, if I had 6 kids, and I started them when I was in my 20s, and they all had 6 kids, and I know that it may not be that way. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying the number has to be 6. It could be 4, it could be 3, it could be 8, whatever God blesses you with. And yes, by the way, I do mean that. I mean, don't enter into a marriage and immediately say, how can we prevent having kids? What are you thinking? And by the way, if you're thinking, well, I need to be responsible and have the money first, I'm going to say, bull. It's for richer or for poorer, by the way. That's what your vows are. It's not just for richer, okay? And if you want to know how to become rich, have kids. Here's how you become rich too. Spend less than you earn. And I've seen people with like 12 kids earn very little money and make it work. And then I've seen people with 1 kid that struggle in poverty even though they're making a lot of money. Why? Because they don't manage it effectively. That's the key, by the way. But let's say, just for the number 6, you have 6, they have 6. All of a sudden now, you've got 36 grandkids. But it's not just the 36 grandkids. Those grandkids are going to get married, and you're going to have in-laws as far as son and daughters-in-laws from the 6 kids. All of a sudden, that 36, just like I have 9 kids and 10 grandkids, and when my wife and I get together, there's 26 of us at this point right now at age 56. What would that look like? I mean, it could be 50 people, 60 people. Those 36 all have 6. And all of a sudden now, within the next generation or 2 generations, 3 generations, there could be 1,000 descendants of you. Now, why does that matter? It's not just like some sort of like macho badge of honor. I'm not talking about being Genghis Khan and having so many different concubines and women in your life that you are literally in 2% of the DNA. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a patriarchy where you've got like unity and culture. See, what makes nations great, families great, is culture. And that culture has to start deliberately from somebody. And if that somebody instills values into their descendants and teaches them to instill those values into their descendants as well too, in the same way that the Old Testament figures would memorize their genealogy and they would talk about what it means to actually be of the chosen people, right? What does this actually mean? Now, we know they weren't faithful to it most of the time. That's what the Old Testament is about, their lack of fidelity. But those heroes that stood out with fidelity were always remembered. And the names Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are remembered as patriarchs of greatness, as is the house of David or Solomon. Now, these people were all flawed, we know it. But through them came greatness. And it's a very important thing for you to know that you have this one opportunity, this one life to do that, to leave a legacy. I can tell you right now, I build big businesses, and there are people that build way bigger businesses than I know. Those are all going to go away. Doesn't matter what the company is. I mean, if you go back and you look at history, and outside of maybe some contemporary things where you think of like American, European titans, in the steel industry or oil or whatever, we think about these are, stories that have been around for 100 years or 150 years. We think about those, sure. But really in antiquity, you think about like Alexander the Great, okay? It wasn't about the wealth he accomplished. It's about the things that he did by the time he was like in his mid-30s. That's a pretty amazing thing. Yes, with all of his flaws, I'm not trying to put him on a pedestal. But we think about these historical figures, even like Shakespeare. It wasn't his wealth. It's what he wrote. It's what he left behind to contribute to society and to culture. But for many people, it's their heritage. It's the people that they left behind. It's the blessing that they had through their sons and their daughters and what that gave them. You know what? When we go to heaven, we want to see them there. And what a blessing it will be to be in heaven with those people that we gave life to with God. God gives all life, but he gives us this great benefit of being a co-creator. There is nothing more than emulating God, being God-like, only through his divinity, not your own pride, not your own godliness, not that, but through the grace of the divine creator of all things, that he has given you the right to participate in that. That is an amazing thing. And there is a reward for it because we were commanded to do that, to find that great woman in your life, to start having children, to go from boy to adolescent. And by the way, if you're in your 20s and you haven't gotten past your boyhood, know that it's about being docile to authority and imagining who you could become. If you haven't gotten past your adolescence, even though you're 30, you got to get past it. You have to be docile and know that there are limits. If you haven't lived a life of adventure yet and taken chances, you need to start doing it. And if you haven't tried to conquer yourself and conquer the world by way of your vocation, you haven't done things the right way yet, and you need to do that. And once you do that, if you don't recognize that you have amassed an enormous amount of intellectual and experiential treasure, and you want to share it with others, then you haven't mentored properly. But if you've done all those things, you're probably now entering into a patriarchy. And what is that? Boy, you know what? It's an interesting spectator sport. It's not one where you go in and you make all sorts of decisions for the family, although you make many, but it is one where you guide the family through your wisdom. You don't guide the family necessarily through all the decisions you made right, but you guide the family through the decisions you have made right and wrong in order to keep them focused on the right track in life. Because we all want the respect of our fathers. We all want the blessing of our fathers. Even if our father wasn't very good, mine was, by the way. We want that blessing. There's something about our father's approval that we want. And if your father fell short, this is where you can actually make up for it